I was born with someone else's headline stitched to my chest. My name is Jonah Mercer, and for as long as I can remember, the world has read me as a footnote in someone else's story. It's a peculiar inheritance, not money, not a last name carried in quiet pride, but a constant, whispered label that attaches itself to every room I enter and every introduction I try to make. People assume they understand the shape of my life from a single sentence typed into a search bar. They think a few clipped words explain my childhood, my choices, my future. They don't ask about the small, ordinary things a life is made of. The way I like my coffee, the sound that makes me laugh, the smell that makes me want to be home. They start with what they already think they know and seldom bother to learn the rest. When I was little, I thought the confusion in people's faces when they saw my mother was just the atmosphere changing. The air at school would get tighter. Teachers smiled in a particular way that didn't reach their eyes. Other parents' glances felt like a kind of weather, an oncoming cold front I had no control over. I learned to read those looks before I could read the alphabet. They meant keep quiet, keep small, don't give them more than they asked for. My mother worked nights. That's what she told me. And because she smiled while saying it, I believed it. I loved the way she tucked my blanket in, how she smelled, like citrus and something softer, like the end of a day. I loved the way she sang out of tune, and the way she made pancakes on Sundays, even when she was tired. None of that fit into other people's neat stories about her. That dissonance, who she was at home, who she was in headlines, is where everything began to go wrong. The first time I understood that my life had been given to me with a scar instead of a gift was when a boy 3 years older shoved a phone into my face behind a rusting swing. The screen was cracked, the video was grainy, and the laughter around me was like a tide pushing at my thighs. I didn't know what I was seeing. I only knew that the words they used felt like blows. "Is that your mom?" someone asked, as if the question were an accusation, as if the existence of my mother's body on that screen made me less human. After that, the world grew louder in ugly ways. I learned the names people would use for me. I learned the jokes that followed my face into classrooms. I learned to scan a room for who might be laughing at the thought of me, and to avoid that person like a landmine. I learned to change in the bathroom stalls when other kids stripped in the locker room. I learned to eat alone at lunch with my back to the windows. At home, everything else was painfully normal. I could get lost for hours watching my mother fold laundry the way she always had, her fingers working folds so precise they could make a towel look like a work of art. She made mistakes that she corrected without swearing. She reported weather with a dramatic ineffability when the news anchor's voice bored her. She cried in the dark sometimes, but she never stopped being present. She was present enough to learn the names of every school friend I pretended to have. She was present enough to hold my chin and say in that low, steady voice that everything would be okay. That voice was a miracle and a contradiction. It told me we could move away. It told me she would leave her job. Some of the things adults said were irrevocable could be changed if you tried hard enough. She tried. She applied for other work. She went to interviews. She took night classes. But the internet has memory more stubborn than a grudge. A single click can pull a life into a gaudy public theater. And once something exists in that theater, it becomes very hard to convince people the actors were more complex than their most public acts. Despite the effort to rebuild, the past kept arriving uninvited. A link forwarded by a stranger. A whispered joke at a party I'd been invited to because someone thought it clever to see my reaction. A mockery painted across the wall of the internet like graffiti that refuses to be scrubbed away. Each instance was a little death, of privacy, of possibility. People would see what my mother had done and, with the sloppy efficiency of a rumor, fit me neatly into the box they had already made. The permanence of that perception is what hurts the most. If someone wants to know me, they don't have to ask. They can find answers from footage edited for clicks, interviews sliced for outrage, forum comments that reduce a person to a caricature. I would stand in a classroom, an office, a grocery aisle, and feel the invisible search bar hovering above me. Type her name, type his connection, and the world will claim what it likes. College was supposed to be my escape. So many people speak about that time as a fresh page. For me, it was an attempt to steal privacy back, to slip into anonymity among 8,000 other students. For a while, it worked. I learned to answer to my own name again. I took philosophy classes and liked the way language could be used as a scalpel to cut through assumptions. I made a conscience out of late-night library study sessions and cheap coffee. I kept my distance from romantic possibilities, convinced there was no way to make a future where the internet's version of my parent didn't follow me into a bed, a job, a family. I learned that certainty is a lie. The way the world asks you to stand under a spotlight and be judged is not satisfied with your attempts at shadow. Someone found a piece of my mother's old life and sent it to a girl I had been seeing casually. She showed the clip, face gone soft and complicated, and said, "I didn't want to know this about you." That phrase, "I didn't want to know," was mercy wrapped in cruelty. It was protection for her comfortable assumptions and a stone on my chest. After that, I stopped trying. I became an expert at small talk. I got a job that required precision and solitude. I kept my emails clean, my social media tidy, my evenings monastic. I found ways to exist that minimized collision with strangers' curiosity. It was during that time, sitting alone in a bus stop one rainy night, that I noticed how much of my life had been shaped by other people's discomfort. Not all of it. I had chosen to cut certain things off my life so I'd hurt less. But much of it, the world's need to preserve certain moral spots, had pushed me into exile. I had become a person engineered to be easy to forget, so the world could feel less guilty. There were moments of grace. A kind librarian who never asked questions about my past. An old man at the corner shop who laughed at my bad jokes and gave me an extra biscuit sometimes. Small, unremarkable human moments that made me feel, briefly, like I was getting credit for who I actually was. Those moments kept me going. But when the world is set up to believe a simple narrative about you, it finds ways to resurrect the old, comfortable story. One morning, a coworker forwarded a link in the group chat, an article with a sensational headline. The comments were worse. Anonymous cruelty wrapped in the safety of distance. They joked and judged and used language like blunt instruments. I sat at my desk, fingers hovering over my keys, and felt every minute of anonymity I had bought evaporate. It wasn't the clicks that stung. Was the certainty that other people had decided who I was and weren't inclined to change their minds. So I started writing. Not in public, not at first. I wrote to myself. Then to the pages of a notebook I carried everywhere. I wrote about the weather of my childhood and the small mercies my mother had given me. The way she learned to iron collars. The way she made tea the exact temperature I liked. The little shorthand we had for "I'm proud of you." I wrote about the vocabulary of my humiliation and the anatomy of my fear. For a long time, my writing was a species of survival. A way to map out the ugly so it could become familiar and eventually tolerable. Over time, the writing changed. It stopped being only an inventory of hurt and started to become an argument. If the internet could offer a permanent account of degrading moments, perhaps it could also hold evidence of the human interior. Maybe, I thought, it could be used to say, here is a life, messy and complicated. That idea felt dangerous, almost naive, but insecurity is a poor guardian of dreams. I created an anonymous account and posted a short piece, 100 words about sitting on a roof at night, watching the city like a slow heartbeat. I expected the usual quick dismissal. Instead, people responded. A string of messages came from other people whose lives had been colored by association. Children of all sorts of stigmatized adults, people whose parents had done things society liked to reduce to a single fact. They said things like, "I thought I was alone," and "This is exactly how it felt." It was a chorus I had not known existed. The replies didn't erase my reality. The online world is big and indifferent and often vicious. But this thread of human recognition offered something better than invisibility. It offered context. It made me realize I wasn't a singular oddity. I was part of a pattern created by how society treats bodies and choices. That realization shifted the weight on my chest. Instead of carrying shame as if it were an unalterable truth, I began to carry it as a wound I had a right to treat. I don't yet know whether the world will ever fully stop folding me into someone else's headline. I suspect it won't, at least not entirely. There are people who will always prefer a single narrative to a complicated one, because stories with fewer characters are easier to manage. But I have learned to live in the gray spaces. I have found friends who read me without typing my mother's name into a search bar. I have found work that values the accuracy of what I do rather than the salaciousness of who my mother was. I have found small ways to be brave, to accept an invitation to dinner without rehearsing the speech I've given 100 times, to go for a run without checking who is taking photos, to sit in a park and allow myself to be visible without bracing for commentary. There are still nights when the old shame wakes me up, loud and panicked. There are still days when a headline will sweep into my peripheral vision and threaten to topple the fragile peace I've built. But I am learning to respond differently. Instead of running, I breathe. Instead of answering every taunt, I choose where my energy goes. Instead of letting the internet decide my worth, I measure myself by the people who stay. The few who will look past a past that isn't mine and stay anyway. If you ask me why it sucks to be born as the child of someone the world chooses to judge, I will tell you honestly, it's because you are judged before you can speak. You inherit a story that is not yours, and you are expected to wear it like a uniform. But I will also tell you this. It sucks, yes, and that fact does not have to be a life sentence. There are ways to take the story back, painfully, slowly, with the help of people who see you as a whole, not a thumbnail. There are ways to live that are not defined by other people's discomfort. Tonight, I will go home to a small apartment that smells faintly of lemon and laundry soap. I will make tea the way my mother taught me. I will read a passage aloud from a book I love because my voice needs to be practiced in softness. I will give myself permission to be more than a headline, more than the sum of other people's assumptions. And somewhere, under the quiet, I will thank the little things, the librarian's nod, the extra biscuit from the shopkeeper, the anonymous message that said, simply, "I thought I was alone too." The world will always have pockets of cruelty, but it also has places where understanding grows, slowly and rooted, like moss in the shade. I plan to find as many of those places as I can. I have been born into a story that began with someone else's choices, but I am writing the chapters that come after. They are not all easy, they are not all triumphant, but they are mine.